everyone, welcome to Ask an Armourer. My name's Kia and today I'm going to be showing you what to do to repair a reel that has a break somewhere in the fencer attachment end of the cable. I'm going to be showing you using this flat style Favero one, as frankly that's just what I have on hand and what I'm most familiar with, but the electronics will be the same in all of them, just be careful about the spring. So the tools that you're going to need for this are a soldering wand. This is my full soldering wand kit where we have my wand here, this and this combined to make the base with my sponge, and then here is my solder and a couple extra little tools that make things a little bit easier. You don't need to have the full set, but you will need the solder and the soldering wand at the very least. I will link this entire set down below in the description because I found it's just a useful thing to have everything put together, and this stand is quite nice to have. In addition to the soldering set, if you have a third hand like this, basically it acts exactly as it says, as a third hand, where these two clamps can hold things for you so that you could focus on finer details. This is very useful for this step. But if you don't have one of these, you could use a set of vice grips or the bench vise if you have one, anything like that. But you will need something to hold a hot metal part later on, which isn't your fingers. You're also going to need your set of small screwdrivers, your wire cutters, your wire strippers, and I like to just keep a pair of pliers on hand because these are always useful. And finally, I recommend having a magnetic bowl of some sort around just to catch all the small pieces and make sure that they stay in one place while you're working on anything. Also, while you technically shouldn't need any spare parts if everything is in good shape from your visual diagnosis, it is helpful to have an extra set of clamshells, screws, clips, etc. on hand just in case you do find anything that needs to be replaced. Now, once you have all of your spare parts and tools that you need, the first thing to do is to start by plugging your soldering wand in so that it can heat up. It will take a few minutes to get to temperature, so you should get this started while you get everything else prepared. I do have this cute little stand to hold my soldering wand as part of the set that I showed you earlier, so that the plastic part is readily available to hold and the metal part is lifted up and away from anything that it might inadvertently touch and damage. But if you don't have something like this, you'll need to figure out some contraption or way to set this up such that this is sort of imitated. Like, you cannot have the hot metal part touching your wood surface, as an example, for risk of fire and burns, and you want to make sure that the plastic part is readily able to be grabbed so that you don't get burned, because as you may imagine, this is hot. Your skin is not exactly great at dealing with hot metal things. It's not fun to get touched by this. So I would recommend having a stand like this if you can, but just be very careful when you set this up. So, and then one more note about the heat. If you can, look for a wand that has a dial heat setting like this. Part of the interior structure of the reel is made of plastic, so we need to make sure that this heat setting isn't too high so that the plastic doesn't get damaged. So I've got mine set to just about 250 right now. I don't really want to go much hotter than that because this will be enough to melt the solder without damaging the plastic for the length of time that we'll be applying the heat. So obviously not all of them come with a heat dial setting, so if you don't have one like that, you'll just have to be careful to use this judiciously and only apply heat as absolutely necessary, but yeah, we just don't want to damage that plastic part. Alright, now that our soldering wand is set to the right heat and is heating up, it's time to get our reel set up. So go ahead and pull the cable out just a couple of feet and tie a loose overhand knot. So you just kind of loop it over your fingers and pull that fold through the loop so that you have something that looks kind of like this. Now this is going to be useful because this will just sit here at the entrance to the reel and make it so that this end here that we need to work on is completely free of tension so that it's not going to be fighting you while you're attempting to put it together. And now that this is all set up, we can take apart this casing and get inside of this to see what we're working on. So I have my magnetic bowl here ready to go to capture all my pieces so that they stay. So first things first is I'm going to take off the body cord holder clip. So this one has no screws attached to it, it's just a press fit. So you just pull it out like that. All the other ones though, you will need a screwdriver. So now that I have that and I can take off this first half of the casing, I'm going to put that into my magnetic bowl as well. Not that it'll stay magnetically, but just it's a little bowl, it'll hold it. Now what you'll note when you get inside of the reel is that there is another little plastic divider in here, and this is actually a pressure fit on the wire that between this and this little knot here provide the actual way that the wire is held in place at the end, because solder joints are actually really quite weak. A lot of people use solder and weld interchangeably, but they are quite different. A weld is a structural element and is very strong versus a solder joint, which is only meant to facilitate conductivity. It doesn't have much mechanical strength of its own. So under here, the wire is clipped or is clamped just a little bit in order to hold this in. Like you can see if I pull on the wire gently, that's not moving. And then this knot as well, if this clamp gets a little loose and slips at all, this knot will catch here before anything pulls on this. And you can see there is 2 extra screws here that don't show up on the other side of the clamshell that we need to remove. And then drop those parts into our bucket as well. And then just a quick note so that you can tell which is which. You can see this screw here is the one that I used for that interior section and has a much rougher teeth pattern than this one here. This is one that goes with one of these nuts and is what connects the 2 halves of the clamshell together. So just to make sure when you're putting this back together, you keep these types separate because they won't fit, won't work if they're reversed. Alright, so now we are finally into this plug end. Let the spring fall back along the wire so that it's out of the way. We don't want to remove it because we'll be putting it back later, but just get it out of our way. So my tip right now is to take your wire cutters and cut all of the colored wires individually. And this way, as you can see, each pin is very easily and clearly labeled as to which line goes back to it. You don't necessarily have to do this, or if you forget to do this step, it's not the end of the world. You will just have to go through, and when you are putting it back together, have to use your test box or multimeter to confirm which pin goes with which so that you can reconnect the correct wires and your reel will work properly and you won't have any crossed wires or anything. But I like using this method because then I don't have to recheck. I can just reattach wires one at a time and everything is good. We're assuming that the break is typically within the first couple of inches, right around where the edge of the spring casing is. That's just, again, where the most fatigue wear typically happens, and most often you can see a kink or something in the wire or a break in the insulation. So wherever you see that, go ahead, take your wire cutters and just trim that wire down by a couple of inches. And so now we have completely clean wire that we are going to set about resetting. You could just throw out this end here. So now switch to your wire cutter, your wire strippers. And what you're going to do is go about an inch down, go to the widest setting. Mine is still a little bit small for my wire, so I'm just going to not close my strippers the entire way. But you want to go about, you know, 2 centimeters, an inch down, and just sort of gently start cutting through that black outer casing. You want to kind of cut and rotate until you're all the way through without damaging the insulation on the inside, because you want to make sure that those are still separated from each other so you don't have any crossed wire issues, but get this off. So alright, so you can just untwist them from each other and clear off this yellow just fill. And it looks like all of my wires in here are okay. So I'm going to go grab some scissors and trim that all off. So that it's not getting in our way of anything. So again, all of this little bit can be thrown away, like with the other couple pieces that we just cleared off. Now, if you find at this point that you have accidentally compromised the insulation on any of these interior wires, that's okay. You can just do the same thing, trim back just another, you know, inch or so and start over. Just go slowly and carefully so that hopefully you don't have to do that too many times. So now, before I do anything else, I'm going to put that knot back in to the end. It is possible to do after this, but as you can imagine, it's much more difficult to do with this large plug attached than if it's just a wire. So that, again, just a simple overhand knot, and I'm going to want to get that right at the base of the start of the black insulation. And you're just going to kind of want to work it down a little bit to be as tight and small a knot as you can get it. This may take a little bit of shimmying. It's not the most flexible wire, but that should be good. It's holding nicely now. So now I'm going to take my wire strippers again, and I'm going to reveal just about 1/2 centimeter of copper on all of these. There, so now I have all 3 of my wire ends exposed and ready for soldering. I'm going to set up my third hand. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and it doesn't really matter what orientation you use so long as it is comfortable for yourself. I tend to put the plug end onto the right side of it, and you can just attach it a la that. You just need to make sure these solder pads are facing up so you have access to them so you can actually do the work. So I like putting the plug end into the right jaws and then the wire later into the left hand jaws, but this again doesn't really matter. It is just for whatever is comfortable for you. I also realize that with the way that you're oriented, there. So right hand, left hand. So now this is a step you can do if you would like, but is not entirely necessary, but is just to tin the ends of these wires here. All this will do is sort of contain the little frilly bits that are on them, as well as mean that they will connect to the pad a little more easily. So all you need to do for this is take your soldering wand that is now heated up, and just sort of put a little bit of solder on the tip of it there, and then you can just transfer that to your copper wire. You can see how just a couple passes mean that there's now a little bit of solder on the end there that we can use to form the joint. So you can just kind of go ahead and do this for all of the other ones. All right, so now we have our wires prepped and our pads prepped, so it's time to connect the two of them. You've seen I have already oriented my wires so that they're in the same order as my pad. Now it's just time to bring them together. And this is the nice thing about the third hand, is you can kind of get these to settle where you need them without much more effort on your part. So I've got my brown now lined up with brown. So this is where having a set of pliers on hand is useful so that they can touch the hot things and not you. But I'm just going to briefly heat up the old pad, just enough that I can release the wire there to get rid of it, and then press the new wire down, and again, just gently heat it up for a few seconds. Until the tinned end melds in beautifully with the old pad. And now you can see that is well attached there. So at this point, just go ahead and you can repeat the process with the other two colors. Alright, and there you go. Now all three of my wires are reconnected. And now I'm going to turn off and unplug my wand because I will not need it anymore. And I can let that cool for safety, and I will also at the same time let the plug end cool because right now these metal ends are a little bit warm to touch and we don't want to work with them right now. But you can use this opportunity to go unplug your soldering wand, throw away any of those extra bits that you got rid of, etc. Alright, so it's been a couple of minutes now and I can touch those comfortably and they're not hot anymore. So I'm going to remove it from my third hand, and at this point I'm going to just double check that everything is now working, that once again I connected everything correctly and that there's not a break further down on the wire that I missed. So I'm going to take my, same as in our diagnostics video, I have got my two Epic cords plugged into either side, and you have to be gentle on this because there's now no support, but you can still plug this in. And yes, looking at my test box over here, everything looks good. So now we can just put it back together. So the first thing we're going to do is take the half of the clamshell that has the extra plastic bridge connection in it, and we're going to lay our plug into there. And you're kind of gonna squish up the knot until it's in that top section. You're also going to want to double check at this point that there's no exposed wire that could possibly cross over. So especially like you see as an example here, the green and the white wire are crossing, but because they're both well insulated, that's not a problem. So all looks good right now. So I am going to go ahead and put my little bridge on. So for this, I just kind of hold it in place with a finger, and I get the first of my screws for this to put it in place. Now I don't tend to screw this in all the way just yet. It's just being held in this position right now, but just so that it has a bit of wiggle room as I put in the second one, I leave that first one a little bit loose. Once I get the second one in, I tighten that completely and then tighten the other one. So now my plug is all secure in there and it's not going anywhere. Now, before we do anything else, we need to reapply our spring. So if you look very closely into the ends here, you'll see this tiny little hole right at the end. It doesn't go all the way through, but that is where this little extra nub of the spring sits. So you can kind of get the spring to settle right in there. It'll take a little bit of finagling, but that will sit there, and now the spring is held in place and will support the wire that way. So now we can put the entire thing back together. So you gently place the top of the clamshell together. You know everything is sitting correctly if you can kind of see all of those are nicely lined up. I always like starting with the shorter bolts at the end here. This one already has the nut in it, so I'm going to go ahead and attach this one here. Don't worry if it gaps a little bit like that, it'll all settle in once you get the nuts and bolts in place. As you can see, I just put those two back in and all of that gapping has disappeared, so everything is okay there. So now we need to just put in these final ones. So you can see the way that this clip is attached is based on this, not quite an S-hook here, but basically this will settle right here, and these top screws will also hold that in place. So you just need to make sure that this settles into that little loop there. Put those on there, doesn't really matter which end goes up, and then you can put these screws back in. And now your fencer can attach to the reel without any issues. And of course, the final step is to take this little pressure fit body cord clip, and you're just going to kind of line, you're going to spread it out a little bit just with your fingers. Going to line one side up with the hole, sort of slide it across, and pop it in. I have not discovered like the best technique for this other than just kind of brute force, but finesse the brute force. You don't need to like break it open, you just kind of need to slide it into where it goes. And there you go. With that, you can undo the stopper knot that you put in and gently put your reel end back. Now at this point, if you want to be really careful, you can do one final check with your test box to make sure that in the final process of putting everything together, nothing got pinched or slipped or anything like that. I am going to say that everything looks good and I have no reason to think that it wouldn't go together, but you can do one final check if you so wish at this point. And that's how you fix the fencer side end of a reel. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe, and as always, if you have any questions, comments, or other topics you'd like me to cover, let me know down below. See you in the next one. Bye.